Welcome to Wildlife for Sleep, a place where ancient oceans breathe slowly, where shadows drift beneath the waves, and where stories are told, not to awaken the mind but to gently quiet it. If these facts help you relax or slowly drift into sleep, please like the video, subscribe to Wildlife for Sleep, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps this channel continue creating peaceful, slow science-inspired sleep documentaries. Now settle into a comfortable position, let your breathing soften, and allow the surface world to fade away. Tonight we descend into the deepest waters of the sea, long before sailors learned to fear the narrow straits, long before stories shaped terror into language, long before Charybdis was imagined as a being. The sea itself learned to pull, not forward, not sideways, but downward into itself, in places where water gathered too tightly, where tides collided, and where the earth beneath the waves opened into unseen depth. Here, the ocean behaved differently, not as a surface to be crossed, but as a mouth that inhaled, exhaled, and erased. In the ancient world, before charts, before measured depths, humans understood the sea through absence. Ships that did not return, voices that vanished, cargo that never washed ashore. When storms destroyed vessels, wreckage told a story. When predators attacked, remains surfaced. But in certain waters, nothing returned. No wood, no bodies, no explanation. Only emptiness, and emptiness demanded meaning. Sailors noticed that these losses were not random. They clustered, repeating in the same places, at the same phases of tide, times when water appeared calm, then suddenly moved with overwhelming force, drawing everything inward, downward, as if the sea itself were breathing. This rhythm unsettled the mind, because it suggested intention where none could be seen, a force that did not chase, did not strike, but waited and consumed everything at once. Before Charybdis was imagined as monstrous, she existed as inevitability, a certainty that some waters could not be entered safely, not because of skill, not because of courage, but because the sea itself demanded total payment. Sailors learned quickly, some dangers take one, some take many, but some take all. And those that take all leave no witnesses, only memory. This total loss was more frightening than violence, because violence allows survival, allows story, allows warning. Erasure does not. When entire crews disappeared, families received no closure, ports received no news, only silence. And silence became heavier than grief, because it offered nothing to understand, nothing to prepare against, nothing to negotiate with. Human minds cannot endure pure absence for long, and so imagination moved to fill the void, not with invention, but with structure. The sea that swallowed ships became a throat. The pull became hunger, the repetition became breathing, and slowly, across generations, Charybdis took shape, not as a creature that moved, but as a place that acted, a presence bound to water and tide, inseparable from geography itself. Before she was named, sailors already respected her, not by avoiding entirely, because avoidance was impossible, but by timing passage, by listening to tides, by waiting when possible. by accepting that some journeys could not be made whole. The sea taught this lesson harshly, and Charybdis became its voice. Unlike monsters imagined with claws or teeth, Charybdis required no form. Her danger was scale, not precision. She did not select, she consumed. Ships did not pass her and lose a few, they vanished entirely. And this distinction defined her from the beginning. She represented not injury, but annihilation, not loss, but erasure. Ancient sailors learned to feel her presence before seeing her effects. Water behaved strangely, currents twisted. The surface dipped unnaturally. Foam gathered where no wind blew, sound changed. Waves struck hulls from below rather than side, oars lost purchase. And the sea felt unstable, as though it were no longer a surface at all, but an opening. These sensations entered memory deeply, passed between crews, across ports, shaping behavior long before myth formed. Warnings were spoken quietly. Do not linger. Do not hesitate. Do not attempt rescue once the pull begins, because once the sea opens, nothing returns. It was from this collective experience, repeated enough to become certainty, that Charybdis emerged, not as fantasy, but as recognition. The recognition that the sea contains places where movement becomes meaningless, where resistance accelerates loss, and where survival depends entirely on distance, timing, and humility. Before poets gave her lineage, before gods explained her origin, Charybdis existed as function, a force that turned motion inward, that erased distinction between ship and sea, and that reminded humans of the ultimate imbalance. The ocean does not need to chase, it only needs to open. This is why Charybdis inspired a different fear than other sea dangers. Storms pass, predators retreat, rocks can be skirted. But Charybdis offered no negotiation, no partial loss, no learning through survival. She taught only through disappearance, and disappearance leaves no teacher behind. Thus, before Charybdis had a name, she was already known, felt, and feared, a breathing absence in the sea, a reminder that some passages do not punish error, they erase it, and that the greatest terror is not pain, but silence, endless, unexplained, and complete. To those who first encountered it, the place later called Charybdis did not feel like water behaving badly. It felt like water changing its nature entirely, as if the sea had forgotten it was meant to support ships, and had become instead an opening, a downward passage, a throat through which everything was drawn. This sensation did not arrive suddenly. It built quietly, currents tightening, surface tension shifting, the horizon appearing unchanged while everything beneath betrayed it. Sailors spoke of moments when the sea seemed to hesitate, a brief stillness, unnatural in its calm, followed by motion that did not resemble waves, but descent, water pulling inward from all directions, foam spiraling, debris circling faster, ships responding too late, caught not by impact, but by surrender to gravity turned horizontal, then vertical, then absolute. This was not chaos, it was structure, predictable in rhythm, Terrifying in scale, Charybdis did not strike randomly. She breathed, drawing the sea into herself, then releasing it again, 3 times each day, the tide itself bending to her cycle. And in this breathing, the sea became something alive, not metaphorically, but functionally. Water moved as though obeying lungs rather than wind. Ancient sailors learned this rhythm through loss. Those who entered at the wrong moment were not damaged. They were erased. The sea swallowed ships whole, masts vanished without snap, hulls descended intact, silence followed. And when the sea exhaled again, nothing returned, no wreckage, no sign of struggle, as if the ocean had closed over its own wound. This totality distinguished Charybdis from every other danger. Rocks break ships, storms scatter remains, predators leave blood. Charybdis left nothing, and this absence gave rise to terror deeper than violence, because it removed memory itself, not only lives, but evidence, as though the sea denied that passage had ever been attempted. Those who observed from distance, who watched another vessel approach, then vanish, carried this knowledge into story, into warning, into silence. Some dangers can be described, some must be shown. Charybdis belonged to the latter. She was understood not through explanation, but through disappearance. The sea around her did not roar, did not announce threat. Often it appeared deceptively calm, sunlight reflecting normally, birds passing overhead. Only subtle signs betrayed the truth: a deepening circular motion, a hollow sound beneath the hull, water lowering where it should rise. Experienced sailors felt it in their bodies before seeing it, a pressure in the chest, a sense of being pulled not forward, but inward. This inward pull reshaped fear itself. Humans are accustomed to threats that come toward them. Charybdis drew everything away, into a center that could not be seen. The enemy was not in front, but beneath, and beneath is where control ends, where breath fails, and where orientation dissolves. The idea of the sea having a throat emerged naturally from this experience. Sailors spoke of being swallowed, of ships disappearing into the water as food disappears into a body. The whirlpool was not imagined as spinning randomly. It was a mouth opening, closing, feeding, and hunger became the only explanation that fit the pattern. Yet unlike predators, Charybdis did not choose prey. She consumed indiscriminately: ships, cargo, sailors, fish, debris, all drawn equally into the descent. This impartiality made her more terrifying, because it removed the illusion that skill or virtue could ensure safety. Timing alone mattered, and even timing could fail. This breathing sea altered navigation permanently. Sailors timed passages carefully, waited for slack water, watched the surface obsessively. Yet even perfect timing offered no guarantee. Currents shifted unexpectedly. The pull strengthened without warning, and once within reach, resistance accelerated loss, oars worsened descent, sails filled wrongly, panic sealed fate. Thus, Charybdis became known not as a challenge, but as an ending, not something to confront, but something to avoid entirely. when avoidance was impossible. She demanded submission to timing rather than strength, patience rather than courage, humility rather than heroism. The living throat of the sea taught an uncompromising lesson. Some dangers cannot be survived, only escaped, and escape must occur before engagement begins. Once the sea opens, no human action matters, and that knowledge weighed heavily on every sailor who approached her waters. In this way, Charybdis shaped behavior long before she shaped myth. She taught sailors to wait, to turn back, to abandon routes, to choose delay over disappearance. And those lessons hardened into story, not to entertain, but to preserve life where memory could not. And so the sea breathed, in, out, claiming everything careless enough to enter its throat, and humanity learned, slowly, painfully, that not all dangers strike. Some inhale and leave nothing behind to warn the next who come too close. The tides around Charybdis did not behave like ordinary water. They did not simply rise and fall in obedience to the moon. They gathered, hesitated, and then moved with intention. 3 times each day, the sea inhaled, pulling itself downward, drawing surface into depth, tightening the skin of the ocean until even distant currents leaned toward the center. And then, after the breath was complete, the sea exhaled, releasing water outward again, violent, chaotic, yet strangely empty, as though something essential had already been taken away. This breathing shaped everything near it, not only ships, but fish, debris, sound, even time itself. Sailors reported moments where progress felt suspended, where forward motion slowed inexplicably, where the pull beneath the hull created the sensation of sinking while still afloat. This confusion disoriented even experienced navigators, because it violated expectation. Water was no longer horizontal. It behaved vertically, demanding surrender rather than movement. The inhale came quietly, deceptively, no crashing waves, no storm winds, only a subtle lowering of the surface, a tightening of current lines, ropes slackening strangely, foam beginning to trace slow spirals. Once these signs appeared, escape required immediate distance, because once the breath deepened, no sail or oar could overcome the inward pull. Effort only fed the descent. When the exhale arrived, it did not restore what was lost. Water surged outward, turbulent, foaming. But empty ships drawn in were not expelled. They did not reappear shattered or floating, they were gone. And this finality deepened terror. Charybdis did not recycle her victims. She erased them completely, turning mass into absence, history into silence. Ancient sailors learned to listen for these breaths, not with ears, but with bodies, changes in pressure, sound dampening, the uneasy stillness before motion. This awareness was passed through generations, never written, only felt, the knowledge that the sea sometimes breathes, and when it does, humans must not be present. The rhythm of Charybdis redefined time. Days were not measured by sun alone, but by water's behavior. The wrong hour meant disappearance. The right hour meant passage. Timing became more important than destination, patience more valuable than courage, and waiting became survival. This breathing sea challenged belief itself. Water was no longer inert. It behaved like a living organ, inhaling, exhaling, sustaining itself through consumption. And this resemblance to life demanded explanation. The idea of Charybdis as a being emerged naturally, because behavior preceded mythology, not the reverse. The tides that breathed in and out became a warning written into movement, not symbol, not metaphor, but instruction. Do not rush, do not assume, do not trust calm surfaces, because the sea can open beneath you without sound, without signal, and without mercy. Thus, Charybdis became known not only as danger, but as rhythm, a pulse in the sea that turned certainty into illusion and taught humanity one of its hardest lessons: that survival sometimes depends not on action, but on waiting long enough, far enough away for the ocean to finish breathing. Before Charybdis was feared as a force that erased ships, before she was spoken of as a mouth in the sea, there existed another memory layered beneath terror, quieter, older, and more tragic. A memory in which Charybdis was not the abyss itself, but something once capable of form, of presence, of belonging in the earliest tellings. She was a nymph of the waters, not bound to destruction, but to movement, a being aligned with flow rather than consumption, part of the living system of tides, rather than its rupture. As a nymph, Charybdis belonged to the margins of the sea, the places where currents met land, where water moved swiftly but did not yet overwhelm. Her role was not to swallow, but to guide, to shape the flow of tides around coastlines, drawing water back and forth in rhythm with the moon. This motion was essential, gentle in intention, powerful in effect, and entirely natural. The sea trusted her, and she trusted the sea. But power in myth rarely remains unnoticed. And when gods turned their attention toward the movement of the waters, Charybdis's control over tides became a liability rather than a gift. She drew too much, too often, either through excess or through obedience to a higher will. An imbalance entered the system. Water pulled inland too aggressively, coastlines flooded, land vanished beneath waves, and what had once been flow became force. Punishment followed, not as correction, but as transformation. Charybdis was stripped of form, of identity, of limit. Her control over water inverted, no longer guiding tides. She became bound to a single place, forced to draw water inward endlessly, 3 times each day without rest, without intention, without the ability to stop. Her existence narrowed into function, and function hardened into fate. This transformation did not grant Charybdis malice. It removed agency. She did not choose to consume. She could not refuse. The sea moved through her as breath moves through lungs, automatic, relentless, and devastating to anything caught within reach. She became an opening rather than a being, a mechanism rather than a will, and in losing self, she gained infinity. Unlike Scylla, who remained partially visible, partially defined, Charybdis lost all recognizable shape. There was nothing left to see, only effect, only motion, only absence. Sailors did not glimpse her body, they witnessed her consequence. And consequence without form is more terrifying than any monster that can be named. The tragedy of Charybdis lies in this loss of boundary. She was no longer separate from the sea, she became indistinguishable from it, and thus could not be reasoned with, could not be blamed, could not be appeased. She was not an enemy. She was a condition imposed upon water itself, an eternal malfunction in the rhythm of tides. Ancient listeners understood this transformation intuitively. They recognized the danger of imbalance, of power unrestrained, of function divorced from intention. Charybdis's story warned that even necessary forces, when pushed beyond limit, can become destructive, not through evil, but through excess. In being reduced to the abyss, Charybdis lost memory, lost rest, lost choice. She did not sleep, did not hunger in cycles, did not finish what she began. She inhaled endlessly, and in doing so, erased distinction between self and sea. Her punishment was not death, it was permanence. This permanence explains why she could never be defeated, why no hero challenged her directly, and why myth never promised her end. To end Charybdis would be to end the tide itself. And the ancient world understood, some forces cannot be removed without unraveling the world they sustain. Thus, from nymph to abyss, Charybdis became a warning not of cruelty, but of imbalance, a reminder that the sea's power is not evil, but it is intolerant of excess, and that when balance breaks, the result is not chaos, but consumption, silent, complete, and final. And so, beneath every whirlpool, beneath every vanishing ship, there lingers a memory, not of a monster raging, but of a force stripped of limit, endlessly drawing the world inward, because it no longer remembers how to let go. A whirlpool does not appear suddenly. It is born slowly, shaped by geography, by the narrowing of channels, by opposing tides, and by depth hidden beneath moving water, long before sailors recognized Charybdis as an abyss. The sea was already practicing its pull, experimenting with motion, learning how to fold surface into depth. Where underwater valleys steepened, where coastlines pressed inward, and where currents met resistance, water began to rotate, not violently at first, but persistently. Small circular movements grew larger, layers of flow stacked atop one another, and a downward channel formed, invisible from above, but decisive in effect. The sea does not spin out of anger, it spins because forces converge. Lunar pull, planetary rotation, wind, and the shape of land combine, and when they do, water seeks the lowest available path. Gravity completes what current begins, and the surface follows. For ancient sailors, this process was unknowable. They did not see underwater slopes. They could not measure depth precisely. They experienced only outcome, a calm surface becoming a widening circle, foam tracing spirals, ropes tightening, hulls responding sluggishly. and then the sudden realization that movement had become inward. Charybdis was born from this pattern, not imagined first, but observed repeatedly, ships lost at the same coordinates, tides behaving strangely at predictable hours, debris circling before disappearance. The whirlpool was not random, it was consistent, and consistency demanded explanation. This consistency transformed hazard into presence. Sailors no longer spoke of bad water. They spoke of a place that consumed, a location that acted. Geography acquired personality because it behaved reliably enough to feel intentional. The making of a whirlpool is silent. There is no roar at its beginning, only subtle distortion, water lowering at the center, currents tightening around it, a soft sucking sound beneath the hull. By the time the spiral is visible, escape is already difficult because inertia favors descent. Even powerful ships struggle once rotation deepens. Steering loses authority. Oars pull unevenly. Sails fill in contradictory directions. And the vessel becomes part of the system rather than master of it. Every attempt to flee adds energy to the spin, feeding the very force being resisted. This is why whirlpools terrify differently from storms. Storms confront, whirlpools absorb. Storms announce themselves. Whirlpools invite approach. They do not chase ships. Ships drift into them. The ancient sea taught this lesson brutally. Do not mistake stillness for safety. Do not assume that absence of waves means calm. Beneath smooth surfaces, forces may already be gathering. Charybdis became the name for this invisible architecture of danger, a way to describe what cannot be seen until too late, a way to warn future sailors that not all threats are loud. Some begin in silence and grow beneath perception. Whirlpools also explain why nothing returns. Objects drawn downward enter depths where buoyancy fails, pressure increases, and currents disperse remains across unseen terrain. Bodies sink, wood splinters, evidence dissolves into the dark pathways of the seabed. Charybdis leaves no relics, because the sea reclaims everything she takes. This reclamation reinforces myth. Absence strengthens belief. Every vanishing becomes proof. Every silence becomes testimony. The whirlpool's physical reality and Charybdis's narrative identity merge, until the two are indistinguishable. And so, the making of a whirlpool is also the making of Charybdis, physics becoming story, motion becoming memory, the sea teaching humans that certain patterns repeat, and that survival depends on recognizing them before the surface begins to turn. The terror of Charybdis was never faced alone. She existed in permanent opposition to another danger, fixed on the opposite side of the passage, and between them stretched a corridor of water with no true safety, only decision, only calculation, and only acceptance of loss. Scylla waited against the rock, Charybdis opened beneath the sea, and sailors were forced to choose not between danger and safety, but between partial survival and total erasure. Those who drifted too far from Scylla's reach entered Charybdis's pull and vanished entirely. Those who steered closer to Scylla lost crew, but kept their ships. This arithmetic of loss became navigation. Captains learned that some passages demand sacrifice, not because of failure, but because of geography, and this understanding reshaped leadership itself. Scylla represented reduction, Charybdis represented annihilation. One took a few, the other took all, and humans consistently chose the danger that allowed continuation, not out of cruelty, but because survival required it. This choice echoed far beyond the sea, becoming a metaphor for every situation where harm is unavoidable, and only scale can be managed. The phrase that emerged, to be caught between Scylla and Charybdis, did not originate as poetry. It was instruction, an acknowledgement that sometimes the path forward runs directly through loss, and that hesitation leads to disappearance. Odysseus would later embody this lesson, steering toward Scylla knowingly, hearing the cries of his crew and continuing forward, because turning back would have delivered everyone to Charybdis. Heroism here was not combat, it was acceptance, carrying guilt in order to preserve life. Charybdis taught that absolute danger removes agency entirely. Once within her reach, no decision matters. Scylla left room for choice, however painful, and humans gravitate toward any option that preserves action. This contrast deepened Charybdis's horror. She offered no negotiation, no partial loss, no survivors to remember, only absence, and absence destroys story. Without survivors, warning ends, memory fades, and danger repeats. Thus, sailors learned to keep distance from the abyss, even if that meant passing close to teeth. Charybdis became the boundary beyond which no lesson could be learned. Because learning requires return, and Charybdis returned nothing. In this narrow corridor, humanity confronted its limits, realizing that some forces cannot be met directly, only avoided, and that sometimes wisdom lies not in bravery, but in steering toward the danger that allows tomorrow to exist. Across centuries, across empires, across changing hull designs and shifting trade routes, ships continued to disappear in Charybdis's waters, not dramatically, not with explosions of timber or cries carried on wind, but quietly, one moment present, the next absent, as if erased from the surface of the world. And it was this quiet vanishing that carved Charybdis into collective memory more deeply than any visible wreck ever could. Ports waited for sails that never appeared on the horizon. Families gathered at shorelines long after expected arrivals. Cargo was listed as missing rather than destroyed. Because destruction implies evidence, Charybdis left none. Her victims did not wash ashore. They did not become ghost stories. They simply stopped existing in the realm of the living. And this finality reshaped grief itself. Survivors from nearby vessels told consistent stories: sudden tightening of currents, water sinking at the center, foam spiraling inward, the sound of rigging straining, then silence. They spoke of watching entire ships descend intact, masts upright, sails hanging uselessly, until surface closed over them, leaving only smooth water where life had been moments before. These accounts traveled faster than maps, carried by sailors from harbor to harbor, whispered in taverns, shared between captains, shaping routes and decisions long before official warnings existed. Charybdis became a location avoided whenever possible, delayed when unavoidable, respected even by those who claimed not to believe in monsters. Each disappearance reinforced pattern, and pattern created certainty. This was not chance, not storm damage, not piracy. This was geography behaving with consistency, and consistency demanded narrative. Charybdis became that narrative. What haunted witnesses most was not violence. It was order. The sea did not rage. It did not erupt. It simply opened, accepted the ship, and closed again. The calm afterward felt wrong, too complete, as though nothing extraordinary had occurred. This indifference was unbearable, because it implied that loss meant nothing to the world that caused it. Over time, records accumulated, certain coordinates marked, certain tides feared, certain seasons avoided. The invisible boundary of Charybdis's reach mapped not by instruments, but by absence, by where ships stopped returning. This accumulation of disappearance shaped maritime culture. Rituals formed, prayers offered, routes altered. Yet none of these stopped Charybdis. She remained unchanged, unmoved by reverence or fear, a constant in an otherwise shifting sea. Even as shipbuilding improved, as navigation became more precise, losses continued, because technology cannot alter underwater valleys, cannot flatten continental shelves, cannot silence gravity. Charybdis endured because the earth beneath the sea endured. Thus, ships that never returned became monuments, not in stone, but in behavior. Every cautious detour, every delayed departure, every captain who waited for slack tide carried the memory of those lost vessels forward. Charybdis lived not in belief, but in decision-making. And so, generation after generation, the sea continued to take without leaving trace, and humanity learned to mark danger not by what remains, but by what disappears. Charybdis did not hunt. She did not stalk vessels across open water. She did not accelerate toward prey. Instead, she waited, fixed in place, drawing the sea itself inward. And anything that drifted too close simply became part of that movement. Her hunger had no jaws, no snapping teeth, no striking limbs. It existed as pull, as descent, as gravity made visible through water. This made her fundamentally different from every creature sailors feared. Predators choose targets, storms lash surfaces, rocks break hulls. Charybdis absorbed everything equally: fish, debris, ships, voices. Even light seemed to dim above her center. She did not attack, she removed. Her hunger did not fluctuate. It did not rise with scent or sound. It followed rhythm. 3 breaths each day, inhalation deep, exhalation empty. And this repetition stripped hunger of emotion. She did not desire, she functioned. This lack of intent deepened terror. Sailors could not bargain, could not threaten, could not distract. Charybdis did not respond to offerings. Prayers vanished into the same downward pull as everything else. Her hunger was mechanical, inevitable, and absolute. Those who approached her waters felt this absence of agency immediately. Steering became negotiation with physics rather than with will. Oars lost meaning. Sails betrayed direction. Vessels ceased being vehicles and became objects, carried by a system larger than human intention. Unlike Scylla, who left survivors to carry warning, Charybdis erased witnesses, and erasure destroys story. Only distant observers could describe her effects, and their descriptions always returned to the same wordless realization. Once the pull begins, nothing remains. Her hunger did not grow stronger over time. It did not weaken either. It simply persisted, generation after generation, unchanged, unmoved by history. Charybdis did not evolve. She endured as a feature of the sea itself. This endurance made her impersonal. She was not enemy, not judge, not punishment. She was consequence, a result of geography interacting with water and gravity. Humans suffered not because Charybdis was cruel, but because they entered her domain. In this way, Charybdis represents the most difficult kind of danger, one that does not care, one that cannot be appealed to, one that offers no lesson beyond distance, and whose hunger exists without awareness. And so, sailors learn to fear not teeth, not claws, not raid, but pull, the quiet force that needs no violence to destroy, because it simply takes everything away. Beneath the myth of Charybdis lies a quieter truth. The sea does contain places that behave exactly as she was described. Modern science gives them names: tidal vortices, hydraulic jumps, constricted straits, deep water sink zones. Yet the experience remains unchanged. Water accelerates, surface collapses inward, and objects caught within these systems vanish into depth faster than human reaction can follow. Across the world, in narrow channels between islands, at river mouths meeting powerful tides, and above steep underwater canyons, whirlpools form with astonishing strength. Satellite imagery now reveals rotating bodies of water kilometers wide, their centers sinking, their edges racing, moving entire columns of ocean downward before releasing them again. Ships today avoid these areas with careful mapping, engines powerful enough to resist weaker currents. Yet even modern vessels have been lost when timing fails. Oil platforms record sudden drops in surface height. Sonar shows massive vertical flow beneath. And debris fields confirm what ancient sailors already knew. When water begins to descend, escape becomes unlikely. These real-world phenomena explain why Charybdis endured. She was not invention, she was interpretation. A narrative framework built atop repeated physical experience. Ancient observers described exactly what they saw. They simply lacked equations to explain it. Submarine canyons channel tidal energy, accelerating flow into rotating descent. Coastal geometry amplifies motion, and lunar pull sets rhythm. Together they create systems that inhale vast quantities of water, then release it again, empty. Even today, pilots flying over such regions note strange patterns on the surface: circular foam, darkened centers, shimmering distortion, and sailors still speak of waters that feel wrong beneath hulls. Technology has refined awareness, but has not removed danger. Charybdis persists because the conditions that created her persist. Geography does not forget. Underwater valleys remain carved. Tides continue to pulse, and gravity still draws everything downward when paths converge. Understanding the science does not lessen the awe. If anything, it deepens it. Knowing that the ocean can organize itself into consuming systems on such scale reveals a power far greater than myth ever suggested. Charybdis becomes not less real, but more so. She lives now not in story alone, but in data, in satellite loops, in pressure graphs, in sonar readings that show entire layers of water being pulled beneath the surface. Modern instruments confirm ancient memory. And so, Charybdis remains with us, not as creature, but as process, reminding humanity that some forces operate beyond narrative, beyond morality, and beyond negotiation. They exist because the planet is shaped as it is, and they will continue as long as tides move. Human fear usually allows for survival. Storms pass, wounds heal, ships can be repaired. But Charybdis introduced a deeper terror, the fear of complete disappearance. Not injury, not damage, but erasure. And this fear reshaped how people understood danger itself. To lose a few sailors is tragedy. To lose an entire vessel without trace is something else entirely. It leaves no bodies to bury, no wreckage to examine, no answers to carry forward. Families are left with silence rather than closure. Ports receive emptiness rather than news. Charybdis transformed loss into absence. And absence is unbearable because it offers nothing to process. This is why Charybdis haunted imagination more deeply than Scylla. Scylla left survivors. Charybdis left voids. Survivors can warn, voids cannot. And without warning, repetition becomes inevitable. Total loss also removes meaning from heroism. Courage has no stage when nothing returns. Strength cannot oppose descent. Skill dissolves in vertical flow. Charybdis stripped humanity of narrative control, leaving only the raw fact that some forces eliminate agency entirely. Ancient cultures responded by elevating avoidance into wisdom. Knowing when not to proceed became as valuable as knowing how. Captains learned that turning back was not weakness. It was survival. Charybdis taught restraint through annihilation. This fear extended beyond the sea. Charybdis became metaphor for any situation where everything can be lost at once: financial collapse, war, famine, natural disaster. Her name carried the weight of totality, the understanding that some choices risk everything, and that awareness must precede action. Even today, people sense Charybdis in moments of absolute risk, when consequences are irreversible, when stakes include existence itself. The myth persists because the experience persists. Charybdis embodies the boundary where calculation ends and acceptance begins. She teaches that not every danger can be managed. Some must simply be avoided, and avoidance requires humility. In this way, Charybdis reshaped courage. Bravery became not confronting danger, but recognizing when danger allows no survival and choosing distance instead. Power in the presence of Charybdis reveals its true limits: strength of hull, force of oars, confidence of captains. None of it matters once the inward pull begins. Charybdis does not confront power, she ignores it, and in doing so, exposes how fragile human control truly is. Her power does not resemble dominance, it resembles inevitability. She does not exert effort, she simply exists where forces converge. Gravity completes what currents begin, and the sea obeys physics rather than command. Charybdis teaches that the most overwhelming powers are not aggressive, they are structural. Human ambition falters here, plans dissolve, leadership becomes irrelevant, Charybdis erases hierarchy, kings sink beside sailors, wealth descends with wood. Nothing retains status beneath rotating water. Everything becomes equal in descent. This equality is unsettling because it strips away illusion. Charybdis demonstrates that the world does not recognize authority, only conditions. When those conditions align, consequence follows. Ancient listeners understood this instinctively. They did not imagine defeating Charybdis. They learned to respect distance. Power becomes wisdom when it recognizes its boundary. Charybdis also teaches that not all power is visible. Her strength lies beneath surface, hidden in geometry, depth, and motion. Humans tend to fear what they can see. Charybdis demands respect for what operates unseen. Modern science confirms this lesson. Massive underwater currents move entire volumes of ocean silently. Pressure gradients shift water vertically, and energy flows through channels carved millions of years ago. Power resides not in spectacle, but in persistence. Charybdis becomes a reminder that survival depends less on dominance and more on awareness, less on force and more on restraint. Her lesson is not defeat, it is humility. She teaches that power without limit becomes consumption, that structure matters more than intent, and that some systems cannot be changed by will alone, only navigated carefully. Thus, Charybdis endures as symbol not of evil, but of scale, the scale at which human influence ends and planetary forces begin. In the end, Charybdis does not retreat into legend. She does not fade when belief changes. She remains because the sea remains, because tides continue to breathe, because underwater valleys still guide currents downward, and because gravity still draws everything toward depth. Charybdis is not sustained by story. She is sustained by structure. Her legacy is not fear alone. It is awareness. Sailors today navigate with instruments, satellites, and sonar. Yet they still respect narrow straits, still wait for slack tide, still avoid waters known for strange behavior. Charybdis lives in these decisions, not as monster, but as memory encoded into navigation. She endures in the quiet adjustments of course, in the hesitation before entering turbulent channels, in the charts that mark dangerous currents, and in the unspoken knowledge passed between mariners that some waters do not forgive. Charybdis also endures within human language. Whenever people speak of situations where everything may be lost, whenever they describe choices that risk total collapse, her name echoes silently, reminding us that some forces do not negotiate, they consume. Unlike creatures that demand confrontation, Charybdis demands distance. She teaches that survival sometimes requires stepping back, waiting, choosing restraint over courage, and recognizing when movement becomes surrender. Her story offers no victory, no triumph, only continuation. The sea breathes, ships pass, some vanish, most learn, and life goes on above waters that never explain themselves. The eternal pull beneath the water remains, invisible, patient, and unchanged. Not cruel, not kind, simply present, Charybdis waits not as hunter, but as condition, a permanent feature of a moving planet. And so, long after myths are forgotten, long after names dissolve, the sea will still open in certain places, water will still spiral downward, and anything that drifts too close will still disappear. Charybdis will persist, not as character, but as reality. She reminds humanity, quietly, endlessly, that some powers are older than story, deeper than memory, and beyond control, and that wisdom lies not in conquering them, but in learning where they breathe. Long after ships learned to avoid her waters, long after charts marked danger with careful lines, long after satellites traced the pulse of tides from orbit, the deep currents beneath Charybdis continued their ancient movement, unseen, unheard, and unchanged. Water still folded inward where seabed sloped steeply, pressure still guided flow downward, and the sea still remembered how to pull itself apart. Memory in the ocean is not carried by story, it is carried by shape, by underwater valleys carved through stone, by channels worn smooth by millennia of motion. Charybdis exists because these structures exist, because gravity still recognizes depth, and because tides still obey the moon. Even when surface watchers appear calm, the deep remembers. Layers of cold water slide beneath warm. Salinity gradients bend flow, and invisible rivers move through darkness. Charybdis is written into these movements, not as creature, but as pattern. Modern instruments glimpse this memory through sonar shadows, pressure anomalies, and rotating columns captured briefly on screens. Scientists describe them with equations, but equations do not diminish their scale. They confirm it. Charybdis is revealed not as myth, but as system. The deep currents remember every ship that passed, not emotionally, but physically. Each descent altered sediment, shifted debris, and fed nutrients into abyssal plains. Charybdis contributes quietly to ocean circulation, redistributing energy, mixing layers, shaping ecosystems far beyond her visible reach. Fish migrate around these zones instinctively. Plankton follows altered currents, and deep-sea organisms benefit from nutrients delivered by descending water. Even destruction becomes part of balance. Charybdis does not only take, she transforms. This transformation is slow, planetary, and indifferent to human loss. The deep does not pause for mourning. It continues its circulation, maintaining the systems that regulate climate and chemistry across oceans. Charybdis thus becomes part of Earth's respiration, an extreme expression of the same processes that move heat from equator to pole, that carry oxygen downward, and that renew deep waters over centuries. Her violence exists within a larger equilibrium. The currents remember, even when humans forget, and in that remembering, Charybdis endures, not as terror alone, but as function, embedded forever in the architecture of the sea. After Charybdis exhales, after foam disperses, after turbulence fades, a strange quiet settles over the surface, not the calm of safety, but the stillness of completion. Water smooths itself, light returns to familiar patterns, and to an untrained eye, nothing appears changed. Yet beneath that surface, absence has been sealed into the deep. This silence is what unsettles survivors most, those who watched from distance. Those who arrived too late. They speak not of noise, but of quiet, of how quickly the sea resumed its ordinary appearance, as though it had not just consumed an entire vessel. This indifference reveals the ocean's true scale. Events that alter human lives barely register in planetary motion. No markers remain, no scars on the surface. Charybdis leaves no trace of passage, only memory carried by those who did not enter her reach, and that memory fades with time, allowing repetition. Birds return to skim the water, fish resume schooling, sunlight dances across ripples. The world continues without pause. This continuity is both comfort and cruelty. It affirms that life persists, while reminding us that individual loss does not slow it. Silence after the spiral becomes its own warning, because it hides danger behind normality. Captains approaching later see only calm sea, not knowing what happened hours earlier, and this erasure makes Charybdis perpetual. Ancient sailors learned to distrust such quiet. They listened for absence of sound, felt for unnatural smoothness beneath hulls, learned that silence can be more threatening than storm. This quiet teaches restraint, patience, and respect for invisible processes. It demands that travelers consider not what they see, but what recently occurred. Thus, the silence after Charybdis becomes part of her legacy, a reminder that danger does not always announce itself. Sometimes it concludes, leaving behind a surface that appears unchanged. Modern navigation is built on satellites, sonar, digital charts, and constant streams of data. Yet when vessels pass through waters shaped by Charybdis-like forces, captains still rely on instincts inherited from ancient mariners, watching surface patterns, feeling vibration through hulls, listening to subtle changes in engine resistance. Technology provides information, but awareness provides survival. Invisible currents shape routes more than visible landmarks. Beneath every successful passage lies calculation of tide timing, depth gradients, and flow velocity. Charybdis taught humanity to navigate not just space, but motion, to treat the sea as moving architecture rather than empty distance. Harbors near such regions still issue advisories: wait for slack tide, avoid central channels at peak flow, respect whirl patterns. These instructions mirror ancient warnings almost exactly. Only language has changed, not lesson. Even with powerful engines, vessels can lose control when currents exceed thrust. Rudders lose authority, propulsion becomes symbolic, and ships drift according to forces beneath them. In those moments, centuries collapse, and sailors experience what their predecessors felt: surrender to moving water. Training now includes simulations of extreme vortices. Captains practice escape maneuvers. Crews rehearse emergency responses. Yet all preparation centers on avoidance, not confrontation. Charybdis remains something to bypass, never challenge. This continuity across time reveals something profound. Knowledge evolves, but geography remains. The sea still moves according to shape and gravity, and humans still adapt behavior accordingly. Navigating the invisible becomes art as much as science. Reading foam lines, temperature gradients, subtle color changes, all inherited techniques refined by instrumentation, but rooted in ancient observation. Thus, Charybdis continues to teach navigation, shaping how routes are planned, how risks are assessed, and how humility is built into maritime culture, not through fear, but through respect for unseen power. Fear usually lives in imagination, but Charybdis embedded fear directly into maps. Certain coordinates became warnings, narrow straits carried reputations, and passages acquired names that echoed loss. Danger was no longer abstract. It was spatial. It had latitude and longitude. Sailors marked these areas carefully. Early charts shaded them. Later maps annotated them. Modern navigation systems encode them with advisories and alerts. Charybdis transformed emotion into geography, making caution a permanent feature of landscape. This geographic fear shaped trade routes, influenced settlement patterns, and redirected exploration. Harbors flourished where waters were forgiving, while coasts near violent currents remained sparse. Charybdis indirectly molded human history by determining where ships dared to travel. Stories followed these routes, myths clustered around dangerous passages, and cultural memory concentrated where loss repeated. Charybdis became attached to specific waters because those waters demanded story. Even today, insurance rates reflect current patterns. Shipping lanes bend around known vortices, and undersea surveys prioritize hazardous zones. Fear has become data, translated into policy and planning. Where fear becomes geography, wisdom must follow. Charybdis taught humanity to integrate emotion into navigation, not as panic, but as information, an early form of risk assessment encoded into tradition. Thus, Charybdis remains on every map, not always by name, but by avoidance lines, detours, and safety margins. A reminder that some places ask more respect than passage. The ocean carries no record of Charybdis, no awareness of legends, no recognition of monsters or gods. It remembers only motion, temperature, pressure, and depth. Names belong to humans, currents belong to the planet. Ships sink, storms pass, myths rise and fall. Yet underwater valleys remain carved into stone, tidal forces continue to pulse, and gravity keeps drawing water downward where paths allow. The ocean does not know Charybdis, it simply behaves as it always has. This indifference is unsettling because it removes intention from loss. Nothing is personal, nothing is targeted. Everything is consequence. Charybdis exists because the earth is shaped as it is, not because of will. Human stories attempt to soften this truth, to personify process, to assign identity to force. But beneath every narrative lies physics, and physics does not listen. The ocean does not distinguish between cargo and crew, between hero and ordinary sailor, between ancient trireme and modern tanker. Everything enters water equally. Everything is subject to the same currents. Charybdis therefore teaches detachment, a reminder that the world does not respond to meaning, only to structure. Acceptance of this truth becomes survival. Yet humans continue to name, because naming allows memory, allows warning, allows community around shared risk. Charybdis persists in language not because the sea requires it, but because people do. And so, while the ocean forgets, humanity remembers, preserving lessons in story, in maps, and in quiet adjustments of course. Eventually, every vessel that passes Charybdis reaches calmer water, currents relax, foam lines straighten, and the sea resumes its familiar rhythm. For those who survive the passage, relief arrives quietly, not as celebration, but as exhalation, a gradual return of control to rudder and sail, a softening of tension held too long. This drifting beyond the pole becomes a moment of reflection. Sailors look back not toward the abyss, but inward, aware that continuation itself is fragile. Charybdis leaves no visible mark on ships that escape, yet she reshapes those aboard, deepening respect for timing, strengthening trust in restraint, and embedding humility where confidence once lived. The sea widens, horizons open, and motion becomes horizontal again. But memory remains, carried in altered routes, in cautious schedules, and in the quiet understanding that some dangers were avoided not through strength, but through patience. Charybdis fades behind the stern, yet she travels onward in thought, in charts updated, in training manuals revised, and in stories told softly between crews. She becomes part of collective awareness rather than immediate threat. Over time, even this memory softens. New generations inherit knowledge without having witnessed loss. Danger becomes abstract, and the cycle begins again. Yet the sea remains unchanged, waiting in its ancient shapes. Drifting beyond the pole does not mean escape from Charybdis forever. It means alignment with a moment when forces allowed passage, and that allowance is temporary, situational, and never guaranteed. Thus, Charybdis remains both behind and ahead, a reminder that survival is always conditional, dependent on timing, distance, and respect for unseen movement. And so, vessels continue forward, across widening water, toward distant ports, carrying cargo, carrying people, and carrying quiet awareness that beneath some stretches of sea, the eternal pull still waits, not as monster, but as motion, not as threat alone, but as part of a living planet that breathes in depths beyond sight.